Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday to you. We have some serious things to discuss today, and I have just the best group of guests coming. You're not going to want to miss any of it. But let me start with Los Angeles. Oh my gosh, Los Angeles. It's home to 3.8 million people. It's America's second largest city. And this week, a chunk of it, a chunk the size of all of Manhattan, burned. Still burning. When Katrina destroyed so much of New Orleans, Americans wept and we offered assistance. When the Twin Towers were attacked and fell on that horrible day in 9/11, Americans everywhere stood up and said, "We are all New Yorkers." Terrible things tend to bring us together. Or they used to. They used to. And if they can't, we are not a nation. But even as fires raged in Los Angeles, as extraordinary efforts were underway to evacuate people, to protect property, to contain the blazes, a new breed of Americans offered not sympathy or help, but scorn. Elon Musk blamed DEI for the blaze. Donald Trump blamed Governor Newsom and, fish, I think. Right-wing social media also targeted the unhoused and so-called eco-terrorists. Who are these people? All while authorities on the ground, with the help from the Biden administration and from each other, were working tirelessly to save what they could. More than 180,000 people have been evacuated. At least 11 are dead. The destruction of property will run into the billions of dollars. It's not just money. People's homes, their businesses, the schools they went to as kids, whole communities gone. Musk, Trump, and the rest of that despicable crowd who are enjoying their freedom to hate online, they are not our future. Because if we have a future, we only have it together. It comes when we say with pride and with love, today we are all Angelenos. My heart goes out to everyone there, and I hope everyone listening will offer whatever assistance you can through the agencies that are offering help. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, that state's Republican Supreme Court has blocked the certification of the reelection of one of their own members, a Democrat, whose victory was confirmed in 2 recounts. Republicans on the court are now not sure whether 60,000 ballots should be counted. Boy, when you start to throw out 60,000 ballots in order to win an election, every alarm bell needs to go off. Different kind of fire. But the loathing of voters is a Republican thing, even when they win. I mean, just look at the new Congress. Already, Republicans have filed legislation that drips with corruption and contempt. They've forwarded a national abortion ban, even though voters have opposed that kind of thing everywhere they've had the chance, even in red states. They've proposed the elimination of the IRS so that the wealthiest will never have to pay taxes. And by the way, so the government will run out of money for Social Security and Medicare. And they intend to allow states to take federal funds from public schools and give them to private religious schools. They also want to withdraw from the World Health Organization to defund the 2 state districts attorney in the country who had the temerity to charge their guy with crimes, the ongoing case in Georgia, and the one where Trump was just sentenced as a felon in New York. None of these things. And this is what they rushed to do as soon as they could. None of them moves America forward. Then, of course, there's the man himself. I'm not going to talk about his sentencing. Everybody knows it. He's a felon. I revere elections, even when we lose. And I respect the office of the presidency, but neither esteem for the office or the majesty of our elections can wipe the moral stench and dictatorial dreams off of Mr. Trump. His vile response to the horrific fire in Los Angeles, his absurd attacks on our allies in Canada and Latin America and Europe, all while he tells us he's trying to schedule a meeting with Vladimir Putin? Are you kidding? It screams, warning, danger ahead, flash, 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 flash. We better pay attention. Ooh, we better pay attention. And the danger is not where the most talented showman is pointing. That's a cover. That is a cover. The attack on voting is an effort. Let me say this differently. We've talked a lot about the GOP attack on voting rights around the country and what's going on in the court in North Carolina, part and parcel. And that attack on voting rights is to make it impossible for our politics to put the brakes on their total control. But parallel to our politics is our civil society. And they're also going after any source of legitimacy that isn't theirs. We better be careful, and we better jealously protect these rights too, just as carefully as we are fighting for voting rights. And let's talk about that, because their plans are underway to weaken universities, journalism, nonprofits, and organized labor. In fact, every institution that might stand in their way. And it is Viktor Orban's playbook and the playbook of tyrants forever. They plan to tax university endowments and to break the tax-exempt status of groups they don't like. Kash Patel, Trump's dream FBI director, that hack, plans to use the agency to sue every media outlet for defamation unless it bows down to the new order. The power of government to bankrupt and to corrupt its adversaries is very real, and they plan to make full use of it. I hear there are 100 executive orders ready to go on day one. I'm sure Trump hasn't even looked at them. He doesn't care. But those guys he brought in, all of those Project 2025 guys, they've been hardworking. They're prepared. And they want to give America exactly what we don't want. And they want full control. Los Angeles will recover. It'll recover because its people are resilient and hardworking, and they care for each other. Los Angeles will recover because the heartless and the haters have not taken over the whole American society. And so many of us are eager to help. But the same can't be said about our government and American democracy, now also on fire, because those same heartless and hateful are about to run the government. And they've been planning. It is a dark hour. And I know many of you are dispirited. It's like the early days of the revolution, and it's Valley Forge time. And for those of you who don't remember, of course, that's when Americans were thinking, maybe we didn't mean it when we signed that declaration a few months ago. This is too hard. We're losing at the war. George Washington is like camped in a snowbank somewhere. And you know what? They looked at each other and they pledged to each other. What was it they said? Our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Well, it's time for us to make a pact too, with each other. At every level of our government, all those local governments that aren't controlled by these guys, and across our society, those of us who love our democracy must engage in disciplined dissent, courageous protest, aggressive litigation, and determined opposition. Do not let them take any more power than they already have. Anything less than that, and we are lost. But if we persevere, as we have in the past, victory will come, as it always has, and it will be like a great city rising from the ashes, as it will. All right, I'm going to take a break, have a cup of tea, and get ready for a fabulous show. Do not go away because, of course, Chris Geithner, and you know him, is up in just a minute.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Chris Geidner is back. And as you know, Chris publishes Law Dork on Substack, and please sign up for it. It is a must read. Chris, an amazing thing has happened to Chris. He's joined the ranks of folks like Linda Greenhouse or Dahlia Lithwick, sort of people who've been famous for reporting on the Supreme Court forever. Chris is in that pantheon because of his own incredible talent and hard work. And maybe aided a little bit by the court's misconduct. But Chris has been just so fabulous. If this is something that interests you, and it must, particularly as we have to protect ourselves from this expanding power grab that we see in Washington, you must read Chris's work. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thank you. Very kind.
Well, I mean it, all of it. It's what you do is fabulous. Hey, I'm so much to talk about. I'm not sure where to start. I mean, the Trump cases, I suppose, but his efforts to extend his powers even before he's sworn in are worth a moment or two.
Yeah, I mean, it really is this. We went through this whole thing last year with the immunity case, and it seemed like we had reached the high watermark of how wild the claims of immunity could get beyond what one would think would make sense, let alone what's actually written in the Constitution, which is supposedly what these guys care about. And then you got these efforts several times to sort of go to court. These weren't just political arguments, which I would totally understand, but to go to court and say that there's a legal basis for a court acting differently because this man is going to be president in a few weeks. And this happened first when they filed an amicus brief in the TikTok case, where they basically said, Trump's lawyer basically said, like, well, he's going to be president on January 20th. The ban part of the law goes into effect on January 19th. So, and the incoming president feels differently about this. So maybe you should just put it on hold until he takes office. That's not how law works, obviously. but that was at least just an amicus brief. But then what we got over the course of this past week were, in his effort to stop his sentencing in New York and in his effort to stop the Smith report from being released, basically, as it turns out, only the January 6th part of that investigation, not the Mar-a-Lago part of the investigation. But in both of those instances, he went to court and said that explicitly to the Supreme Court that there should be the same sort of unconditional immunity given to a president-elect that we give to a president, preventing them from prosecution. Now, luckily, the Supreme Court didn't take that up. But more concerningly, and we can go more into this, the vote was 5-4 to grant an injunction stopping New York from holding his sentencing on Friday.
Okay. Like you, I'm having trouble finding the words. Why was it 5-4? What? I mean, thank you, John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett for not, for a vote that is so obvious that it's hard to thank you for. But the other guys,
I mean, it was especially concerning because of the reality that, what I wrote that night was like, okay, I'm not going to pretend to be surprised about Thomas and Alito's votes. They're sort of lost causes at this point. But I do think that it was notable that Kavanaugh, who would probably have been the next most likely, he has this aggressive view of executive authority. But then also Gorsuch. And when you got four justices who are saying that that the Supreme Court should jump into a criminal sentencing in the middle of the sentencing on no basis other than briefing that the president-elect thinks that law should be expanded to protect him before he even takes office. And then the other thing that he was challenging that had lost thus far was some evidentiary challenges over whether or not certain things that were brought in his Manhattan trial were properly brought in, whether they should have been excluded under the immunity ruling from last July. But what we rarely get opinions on these matters, on shadow docket matters. But interestingly, we did get a brief note with the order that because of the fact that we know that there were four dissenters, we know that all five of the justices remaining were in the majority and all agreed to the language of the order. And the one thing that it said was any of Trump's concerns about evidentiary issues can be raised on his normal appeal. Like, in other words, why are you here?
Right.
And that really is what it comes down to, is there was literally nobody else in the country who could have gotten 4 votes for that. There's nobody else in the country who could have gotten any votes for asking the Supreme Court to jump into a state court sentencing when there can be an appeal of the sentencing anyway.
Yeah, no one else would have even had a hearing, let alone a ruling. Yeah. Oh, Chris, but this brings up the whole question of Trump and, sort of the right wing more generally, their efforts to use our legal system to take more power for themselves and to delegitimize any power that of the organizations, the institutions, or the individuals who might oppose them.
Yeah, I mean, it is for those 4 justices in particular. It sends a very stark warning sign going into this next 4 years, because what that means is that in circumstances as stark and as untethered to existing constitutional law as this one was, you can go that far out of the norm. There are going to be 4 justices open to siding with him. Why that is particularly important is that it only takes 4 justices to hear a case. And so if Donald Trump comes to the court, like this was on the shadow docket, but if Donald Trump tries to put something in place in the coming months and a lower court enjoins it, like think about last time with the travel ban, there even if it's something very, very, very far outside of historical practice, very, very far outside of precedent, it appears that there will be at least 4 justices willing to side with him. at least insofar as they would be willing to take the matter seriously. And I think that that would be enough for them to be willing to grant cert. And once you've granted cert, then they can sort of start to play their games that they played with Dobbs and try to push votes along, push people aside, minimize the Democratic appointees, and essentially bully Roberts and or Barrett to join them and get a majority.
Chris, how do we America needs an independent judiciary. We need a functioning Supreme Court. How do the right wing thrives on saying all the institutions are broke. We need to throw them away. Nobody should have any power. This government doesn't work. We need to just give me the power. I'll fix it, and that'll be fine. So they thrive on throwing out our institutions. How does somebody like me or you talk about the Supreme Court, which is throwing away its own legitimacy as fast as it possibly can without contributing to this notion that everything is so broken we just need a strong man to fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I found it pretty amusing. I mean, clearly in a depressing way, clearly Thursday's vote, 5-4 vote, from Roberts was an attempt to protect some legitimacy of the court. And yet, because of the fact that he wasn't able to keep the 4 from dissenting or from saying that they would have granted Trump's application, what you ended up with was like a further illustration of how broke it is. And so even when you can argue that Roberts is trying, whether it's a fig leaf or not, like even when he's trying, he has lost so much control of this court that even when he does try, he ends up with a situation outside of himself that does still make the court look more out of control. And I think it's appropriate that followed the news a day earlier that the day before that, on Tuesday, Justice Sam Alito and President-elect Trump had a phone call. Now, it was allegedly about this former clerk of Alito's who wanted a job in the administration, and he had worked for Bill Barr, and so Donald Trump doesn't trust his loyalty. But regardless, and a point that my good friend Jay Willis made at Balls and Strikes was like, how many times over the past 10 years have you seen Trump start a conversation that had one purpose, that he maintained that same purpose the entire way through? Like, yeah. If Donald Trump was told before he got on the call, don't talk about ongoing cases, what are the odds that he never brought up something, even in his stupid Trump jokey way, that was like, you're going to take care of us in the coming years, right? I mean, it was just so inappropriate. And for that to have followed just a week after John Roberts got up and issued his end-of-the-year report, basically attacking critics of the court as illegitimate in a lot of instances, just because he decided that they didn't have what he called credible basis for their allegations of bias.
Yeah. Chris, I even wrote about that. I was so mad. I mean, John Roberts can pretend all he wants to, that, the court is so high and mighty we mortals just can't be in a position ever to judge. And he left out, of course, all those rulings he did that contributed to the mess we're in. But you and I have talked about this before. We mortals understand corruption. we mortals understand bribery. And if we don't understand all of the aspects of the law, we understand that presidents aren't kings. And oh, by the way, there's nothing lawyerly or about the law that makes them decide which cases they're going to rush to judge and which ones they're going to wait to judge.
Right.
And just on that evidence alone, he's full of what.
Yeah, I mean, it's very. It was very frustrating to see the way that he presented things on New Year's Eve. But I personally took a little this is your karma cheap glee in the Alito story this week, because it's like, how many, like, we're now at the point, and I think Gabe Roth at Fix the Courts made a very good point, that it's like Alito has, at least in the past, tried to like keep his inappropriate behavior somewhat hidden. Like, it seems like he's moving into Clarence Thomas territory now with just like not caring. And I think that's going to be very bad for efforts from what you were talking about like how do we use our institutions, but also how John Roberts is going to be able to lead a court if there are people who just like outwardly take actions that they know are going to rightfully cause questions about the appearance of impropriety.
I think they have made a different calculation, and it's one that I'm seeing more and more. Certainly, Donald Trump has done this. Elon Musk does this, and a bunch of our country does this because I guess nobody's ever had a civics class and doesn't understand. But I think we're in a time when everybody believes power is legitimacy, period. And so show that you can do things that other people don't want done, because that means you're more legitimate.
Yeah.
Well, that's terrible. That's every tyranny in the world. That is not a democratic republic. That is not what anybody fought for in any war we've ever been in.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, and we're going to, he's eventually going to have to face what he's dealing with, because, like, there are, like, the last part of his section, the last section of his end of year report was this discussion about people saying that, like, that concerns about, like, not adhering to court rulings. And right. Like, it was very much it was very much a hot dog meme moment for me reading that section.
Well, let's talk about that, because
if your rulings don't go far outside of what a majority of people want, it's never going to be a question of whether it should be adhered to.
I don't know, Chris. Texas didn't adhere to, but Texas has taught the whole country how to ignore the court. They did it. Abortion was the law of the land when they passed their vigilante bill, and this court sort of let it stay out there while it was the law of the land, while Roe was the law of the land.
Well, but
so there's a lot of.
I'm going to push back on that. Like that's evil genius lawyering that the Supreme Court should have bit through and struck down. That's another example of the court not doing its work. That's not an example of Texas not adhering to the law.
That's an example of the Supreme Court not adhering to the law when they let Texas get away with it.
No, and that's what I'm saying. It's the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and and now I think they might be talking. I mean, Roberts might be talking about Trump. As I read Trump versus the United States, this horrid immunity case where they said presidents were immune, I think if I read it carefully, and I'm not a lawyer, so you correct me, but it sure looked like Roberts was saying, he can, whatever he wants to do, he can do. We're not sure where that line is, where he really crosses into something illegal, but it'll be up to us when the time comes to let him know.
Yeah,
that's how I read it.
I mean, that's not how I read the end of your report. But
no, not the end of your report, but the Trump versus U.S. So
that was definitely his intent in Trump v. U.S. But I mean, the problem with that is like the reality of Trumpism. I mean,
in the first term,
okay. I mean, in the first term, look at it took them 3 tries to get the travel ban, but they got it. Like, just because more of the problems in the first Trump term was that they were stupid, that they did things wrong. I mean, they didn't get the citizenship question in the census because they violated the APA. It wasn't an equal protection argument that John Roberts was buying.
Yep.
And I mean, so if we go into this second term, like, I think that even if the court does say something, they won't do what they did for Jack Smith and slow walk a case. They'll hear it quickly. They'll resolve it. They'll tell Trump what he needs to do to fix it. And then they'll issue whatever the problem order was, version 2.0, and that will be something that passes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, the Impoundment and Control Act is gone for sure. Let's change from the Supreme Court for a minute.
Protection, Eighth Amendment. I mean, all of the amendments that liberals used are not going to be expansively read under this court. Like, they're just, that's done. So those claims were never going to win when challenging Trump's actions in the coming 4 years. The only things that are going to win are going to essentially be technicalities.
That's really horrifying. Let's talk about something that shouldn't be a technicality. Let's turn to the North Carolina Supreme Court. Like, you know this business about not telling the state not to. What's going on?
I'm not going to be able to go too in depth into that because honestly, it's something that I've not even been able to keep up with.
Okay. Well, there's so much of that.
I read that's how busy this week has been. I mean, it definitely appears that the Supreme Court had. I mean, if you want to explain it a little, like, I can give you
that's all right.
seconds on it.
The audience hears me enough. We can go on to something else. I'm wondering defensively what Democratic governors can learn from what Texas did in the last administration. What can we do in these states to protect, the things that we love from?
I will say Democratic states have sort of gotten the signal, and I mean they're certainly not Paxton style, but they're I mean. Well, they're not under indictment, but I mean, you saw the efforts from many Democratic-led states to pass. I mean, in addition to like sanctuary city stuff, you saw things relating to abortion care, protecting abortion care. You saw things protecting to gender-affirming care. This came up and is going to lead to some court challenges, which could lead to difficulties in a case that Paxton did bring against a doctor in New York on who he alleges was mailing medication abortion to pills to Texas residents, and asserting that in the lawsuit, he asserted that one of those women had to go to the hospital to get aftercare. Notably, the lawsuit doesn't say what it was and whether there was any actual harm or whether it was just sort of an out of an abundance of concern from the mother, the woman. But it is a case in which very quickly Governor Hochul, who certainly hasn't always been liberals' favorite figure over her time in office, very quickly came out with a statement that afternoon saying that that New York passed its shield law to protect people's right to obtain abortion, and she would do everything that she could and that the state could within its power to enforce its shield law. The Attorney General did the same. You saw other statements from California governor. I do think that there is a better understanding of how quickly we do need to be moving in these situations. And I think Tish James in New York has shown an ability to move quickly, and I think that will be important in the coming months. Yep. I also think it's important for local electeds. We saw, the fight to the loss of their jobs that prosecutors in Florida embarked on in order to impose the will of the voters on their offices. And Ron DeSantis was successful in removing them because of a combination of the way that the Florida Constitution is written, that even though the prosecutors are independently elected, they do technically still, within the legal system of the state, the governor is still over them. And court decisions that the Florida Supreme Court has issued over the past decade that have increased the scope of that power. But local officials also do have power, and in different states they have much more power, and are able to keep protect their citizens more aggressively, and they need to be looking at those powers, working on those powers, and then acting on those powers. Yep,
I couldn't agree with you more. And then when the Supreme Court tries to take them away, this Paxton case is going to get to them eventually. It's going to be like the fugitive slave laws.
Certainly your governor has made clear that he will stand in the way.
He's going to try. Yep.
Both physically and metaphorically, in the way of Trump's efforts. And I think we need more of that. I think that it's going to be very interesting when you've got Pritzker, Newsom, and Hochul as sort of the big three. And they're very, very different figures with very different constituencies. Yeah. And I think they could become a powerful force. But I think what we're more likely to see is similar to what we saw during the Biden administration, what has traditionally been the case, that Florida, Texas, and to a lesser, Florida and Texas when it's Republican, when it's Democratic administrations, California and New York, and to a lesser extent Illinois when it's Republican administrations, will do things on their own. They have big enough economies, big enough numbers, big enough sort of social moral authority to act on their own. But then you will also see strong efforts from either multi-state efforts or states that do have unique powers within their laws. Things that we saw after Dobbs with state constitutions and right to privacy written in the law, or sex non-discrimination written into the Constitution, that will be used. And like there was an example, Steve Marshall is the Alabama Attorney General, and he is not who you would have thought would be a key figure in fighting the Biden administration, but he was giving as much credit as I can to what they did. He was very smart and hired a very good Solicitor General, Edmund LaCour, who was able to file lots of good cases, able to take cases up to the Supreme Court. Alabama was Tea Party in a lot of the redistricting cases that made it up to the Supreme Court. And, I mean, Edmund LaCour was literally, it felt like he was up at the Supreme Court
all the time. Yeah.
All the time. And so it could also be a small state that just decides they have the mandate from their voters to do everything that they can. And
okay, Chris, hang on. I got to interrupt you because I have two more questions I want to get to in the time we have. So one, let me just lay them both out so you can think about how to answer. One is the court sort of obliterated the executive branch's the deference to the executive branch when it comes to regulation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think Trump will try and regulate by executive order. And I want to sort of get your sense of that when they clearly said, well, that's all up to Congress now. And the other is this notion that the 14th Amendment protects a fetus. And I just want to get your sense of where where both of those are going.
I mean, we saw the best example of sort of the complications of the last term's Loper-Bright ruling that ended Chevron deference, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah, complication is a nice word. I would say chaos, but yeah.
Previously, if a law had ambiguity in it, which all laws do because there's a lot out there in the world. If a law had ambiguity in it, the agency charged with enforcing that law, if they had a reasonable interpretation of the law in their regulations enforcing the law, the courts upheld it. We got rid of that because John Roberts says that every word written has a single best meaning. And what that meant, we saw the starkest example of that. And putting aside the merits of the case, which I know there are some people who think, even on the left, who think that the FCC went too far with net neutrality. But in the Sixth Circuit decision overturning net neutrality, the decision for the court, literally they said, with Chevron gone, we get to decide this. And that is it was almost an accidental admission, but also like laying a stake down that like Yeah, no, we're going to get to do this. It wasn't even a Trump appointee. It was Judge Richard Griffin, a George W. Bush appointee. He said, applying Loper-Bright means we can end the FCC's vacillation, which those vacillations were elected officials appointing people who then made different decisions based on what the voters who elected them wanted, which is what democracy is. And instead, what Richard Griffin said is, no, John Roberts told us now we get to decide. And that's true. And so to the extent that I think you're right, like to the extent that I mean, Trump, like a lot of times executive orders aren't actually executive orders. They're actually like presidential memoranda directing agencies to take X action. And then those agencies are using their regulatory authority to make those changes. But in any case, all of that, if it's not law, is regulation. And there has to be some either constitutional or legal authority for it. So even when a president issues an executive order, there is either a constitutional authority authorizing that or a statutory authority authorizing that. And what's going to happen is that there are still going to be cases, and where I think the Loper-Bright ruling really ends up being this 2 bites at the apple for conservatives and 0 bites at the apple for liberals, is that now if a Democratic administration, Democrats have to win the White House and then pass a rule that a far-right court decides is the single best meaning of the law. For Republicans, they only need to get one step to get their way. And so, Donald Trump is going to do things, and there's going to be some things that they procedurally do wrong. And there might be 1 or 2 things that just go so far outside of the possibility that even conservative courts don't uphold it. But in the most instances, think about like Judge Reed O'Connor or Matt Kaczmarek. They get a Trump regulation, a Trump administration regulation that the Chamber of Commerce sets up in Fort Worth, and then do you think that they're going to think that Donald Trump didn't pick the single best meaning of the law?
No, not ever. Not ever. It's going to, at some point, you and I are going to have a long conversation about the exceptions clause and how it's time to wake up to that little piece of our Constitution.
There will be many. In the first Trump administration, my old editor, Catherine Miller, and I, who is now at the Times, used to always refer to a series of my work as, here's a part of the Constitution you never thought you'd need to know about.
Yeah.
And so, we're leading into another Trump term, so we will be leading back into that.
Yeah, like the first 13 words of the Second Amendment, which apparently don't mean anything anymore, so why bother knowing them? Yeah. All right, so what about that other question I asked you, 14th Amendment protecting fetuses?
Yeah, fetal personhood is the idea there, and it's certainly something that people on the pro-life right have wanted for some time. It's something that that some states have tried to put in their constitution, saying basically, as far as the U.S. Constitution will let us go, this is our policy. And it is certainly something that there were people who wanted that to be Trump's position in the campaign. I don't think that is something that Trump would be going for. I think there's some real question. I mean, I think that not even that specifically, but abortion generally is going to be an area where the right feels like they're having to push Trump. Now, there are going to be some people in the administration who are those far-right people, far-right anti-abortion people who want the administration to go that far. And so there might be some areas where you do see those things. I know that that's one of the areas that the right had concerns about RFK Jr.'s nomination.
Yeah.
Is that how could we possibly trust somebody who's been pro-choice to run HHS out in a post-Roe world? So I don't think that the court is eager to be jumping on that bandwagon.
Good. Okay. Phew. That makes that is the happiest thing that we've talked about yet, if that's true. So what are you looking at as the... I mean,
I do want to say the other side of that, though, is that we don't need a personhood amendment or reading personhood into the 14th Amendment to fetal personhood into the 14th Amendment in order to reach those sorts of results for lots of people and fear about those sorts of results for lots of people, because there are many ways, even before Roe was struck down, that states and jurisdictions that wanted to heavily police pregnancy and did charge people with criminal violations due to the ways that they acted during their pregnancy. And so I think those sorts of laws that were in place before Roe was struck down are certainly able to be more heavily utilized now, because they're in, especially when they're in states that have flat 6-week bans or even near total abortion bans, because they're just more free to do it. And as Alito said, rational basis is all that applies.
Yeah. Well, I expect it very tough for abortion rights, increasingly difficult if you're gay, and really quite frightening for anybody who is in the trans community.
Yeah. I mean, and we've got the I wrote about it, Law Dork, you can read it. I know we're running out of time, but the Title IX rule was revoked, was vacated nationwide this week by a judge in Kentucky. And we've got the trans care case that's still pending, Scarametti, and who knows what's going to happen with that in the coming weeks once the Trump administration takes over. There are private plaintiffs in the case, so it will likely go on in one form or another, but certainly there could be efforts to make it seem even less palatable to the courts than it already did.
Well, Chris, again, everybody should go to Law Dork on Substack, or just search in Google. You'll find it. It is fabulous, and it is essential reading if we are going to protect the rights we have, and more than rights, if we are going to keep the incoming government from grabbing powers they don't have, claiming them and getting their arms around them and becoming even more entrenched by cheating, by breaking the rules. You got to read, Chris. You just have to do it. So
thank you,
Chris.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. The indefatigable Will Bunch, the national columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, is back with us. Will, first, Happy New Year. I don't think I've talked to you yet this year. I hope you got a moment
I don't think
of
so
rest.
either. Yeah, a little bit. I'm actually taking the coming week off to kind of gird myself up. I'm going down to D.C. for 2 days. If all goes well, I'm trying to get into this Meshuggah rally that Trump is going to have at the Capital One Arena Basketball Center the day before the inauguration.
Well, this time he's going to have a crowd. The one thing that matters.
Yeah, I mean, it'll probably all be like tech pros at this point. What's the future of MAGA? I feel like the MAGA base is probably tapped out, but he's got all these new fans, also known as CEOs and big tech, who I'm sure are going to be flooding Washington. I mean, it's going to be interesting just to see the scene down there.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
I hope you get to interview Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh my gosh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I know what to say to him, but
I know what to say to him. Yeah, you cozy up to a guy who wants to be a dictator because you want him to force other nations around the world to abandon their laws so you can make more profit.
Yeah, absolutely. What's really scary, I actually saw a good article this morning, and I think this really rings true is, there's a bunch of reasons that the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world want to get in tight with Trump, and keeping their taxes even lower is got to be one of them, right? But the biggest one is these guys are obsessed with making their push into AI, and but they're going to need a lot of help, to do AI the way that Meta and Amazon and all these other companies want to do it. They're going to need these massive data centers, and I don't know about how you feel about this, but it seems like a nightmare because you're talking about a huge upswing in the demand for energy to power these things. And, it's all coming together. We're watching these wildfires in Los Angeles. At the same time, you've got the future of AI cozying up to this wannabe dictator new president so they can burn more fossil fuels to make themselves richer.
There's one other thing they want, Will. They also want, Europe has laws that protect the privacy of people, and Europe has laws that protect the children so they can't operate in Europe the way they do in the United States. And you know what? It's expensive for them to try and protect their customers in Europe, which they don't bother to do with us here. And so they want Trump to bully Europe to get them to adopt the same no protections we have.
Yeah, it's just all a dystopian nightmare, at this point. I know that doesn't sound indefatigable as you introduced me, but it feels kind of fatiguing right at this particular moment, doesn't it?
It feels like Valley Forge. It feels like we're at that place where we could lose everything. And people are afraid we're going to lose everything. And people are rushing to, remember the Brits occupied New York. And lots of those good citizens of New York were cozying up to them, throwing parties for the British, soldiers and thinking we're going to get with them. And only a few brave people who were willing to freeze to death that winter with Washington gave us the courage and a couple wins to fight back. We need those wins now because we're backs to the wall. It feels like that. I'm not dispirited, but I know that we are up against it.
Yeah, and you're right. It's happened again and again. I mean, think about how badly the first year or two of the Civil War went for the North, right? Or
Yeah,
and you look at something in our lifetime, the civil rights movement, our young lifetime, it's still our lifetime, but Martin Luther King suffered a string of setbacks. He had a campaign in Albany, Georgia that was kind of a flop, and people were kind of thinking he was washed up. And then he turned around, and there was Birmingham, and then Selma, and all of a sudden you had a Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So,
he came to Chicago. It was a disaster. He said it was worse than anything he ever encountered in the South. And then, of course, they shot him. He got killed.
Yeah.
It was all awful, but the accomplishments were real.
Right. Absolutely. In my lifetime, this feels like a kind of a much worse version of 1984. And what I mean by not the Orwell book, but I mean the actual year. And what I mean by that is, I was a senior in college when Reagan was elected the first time, and you're thinking that, well, maybe America electing such a conservative president was kind of a fluke. And then in 84, he won in a landslide, and the realization that, at least for the moment, this is what, America wants, and, we're going to have to rebuild from this bad place. But, the thing is, as bleak as it looked in like 84, 85, we now know that from 92 until 2020, Democrats would get the most votes in 7 out of those 8 presidential elections. So, you're absolutely right. You have to roll with the ups and downs, but in the short term, and feel free to ask me a question, because I'm not exactly sure which of the many topics you want to focus on. I'm very.
Well, let's talk about
focused.
this one. Let's talk about Los Angeles. Listen, the horrific responses to Los Angeles, and maybe you're like me in this, but maybe you have a broader lens than I do. Because are there any circumstances that, a partisan like me might be missing where a decent person might approve of the behavior of the right-wing echo chamber when they see an American city on fire?
No, you don't have to think. Yeah, you don't have to think very far back in our past, and I'm talking about 9/11, right?
Yes, of course. We're all New Yorkers.
Yeah, exactly. And New York, even though 2000, 2001, that period wasn't, as crazily polarized as today is. But despite that, New York was definitely, demonized on the right in that era, right? That, probably more so than LA, I would say, that this was, and, you didn't have people on the right trying to blame 9/11 on, New York's Democrats not being prepared, or nobody was saying, I guess DEI didn't really exist as a term, but nobody was saying that affirmative action or whatever they would have said in 2001, caused 9/11. That would have been crazy. You would have been shunned. You would have been whatever the 2001 version of getting canceled. If you said things like that. And now it's perfectly acceptable to look at not all, but the fact that Los Angeles has a mayor who's a black woman, and the fact that its fire chief and some of its fire officials are women, or people of color. To look at that and to say this is all happening because of DEI is totally, to these people, acceptable, and it shouldn't be. And we should, and the fact that it's happening in the same week where these major influential companies like Facebook or Meta and like Amazon are, not only posing up to Trump and not only changing their rules around content, but they're also promulgating these basically anti-LGBTQ policies in their own companies. So it's not just something they're saying in a vacuum, but these companies in trying to move to what they think is the new normal in America are actually, rolling back people's protections in the workplace. They're rolling back people's protections about feeling safe online when they go on the internet. It's not good.
Jeff Bezos wrote a check for $40 million to Melania Trump.
Yeah, I think that's not. I don't know if that's the exact economics, but Melania Trump will ultimately see millions. I don't know if it's going to be 40 million because of the way.
All right, let's just say it honestly. But he okayed a $40 million project to tell her story that she's in charge of. That is known in Chicago. It's a complicated thing, but in Chicago, we just call it a bribe.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, whether it's 40 million or a million, if you had told me a few years ago that the second richest guy in the world is paying $1 million or 5 million or 10 million or 20 million or whatever it turns out to be to the wife of the president-elect, absolutely it's a bribe. And, somebody should be investigating it. Obviously Trump, Pam Bondi, or, assuming she gets confirmed, isn't that person. But, somebody on Capitol Hill somewhere, somebody should look into it, you would think, but it's probably not going to be looked into. So, but it's a bribe, absolutely.
It's a bribe, absolutely. I mean, you're in, Philadelphia, and I'm in Chicago. We know what a bribe looks like. It looks like putting a Supreme Court justice on a plane and flying him to a fancy vacation right before you have something before the court. It's pretty easy. Bribe.
Yeah, but I think he said it well. I mean, that's the cycle. It's when we accept one type of behavior along those lines, all of a sudden any type of behavior becomes acceptable. It's like when we stop questioning, these luxury gifts that are essentially bribes to Supreme Court justices, then something else happens, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we didn't punish Clarence Thomas, or we didn't punish Justice Alito, so why should we punish Trump or Melania Trump? It's really discouraging. Although I will say, and it's heartbreaking the extent to which his hands were ultimately tied. But I do think I do applaud the perseverance of Judge Merchan in New York for looking, he basically said, I'm going to do whatever I can. And he was so hamstrung at the end that whatever he could do was the bare minimum. But he said, ultimately, it's the right thing to make sure that this conviction is on the books.
Yeah, I think he said he'd do whatever the law requires, and he did.
Yeah.
That right. is an amazing thing, really.
And it's a reminder there are some people out there who believe what you believe and what I believe and what would imagine most of the people listening to this believe, which is that no one should be above the law. And reality is complicated. The fact that he didn't receive any actual punishment for this crime, is basically above the law. But at least it wasn't. At least we can,
You and I can call him a convicted felon on the air and not worry that we're going to lose, get sued.
Yeah, Exactly, which is
something, not much, but it's something.
Which is becoming a big
So we should say it a lot. Convicted felon. It's like free. Get out of jail free card. Oops, you got one. You're a convicted felon.
And apparently he could lose his liquor license in New Jersey. So it's like
that'd be good. Hey, Will, you talked about
anything you can claim to.
A minute ago, you said we don't hold. We didn't hold Clarence Thomas accountable, so maybe we shouldn't hold Melania Trump accountable. I have a different take, partly because I was in government and I'm familiar with people who want to give you bribes and cross the line. And I think there'd be a really far more effective deterrent if instead of going after the cheap politician who goes to jail for taking a bribe, you start going after the people who pay the bribes.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like they do with, or just like they used to do, I think, with prostitution, right? You want to shut down prostitution, punish the customers, right?
Right. Let's go after the guys who are given the money. For a change, that I think would be far more effective than going after, the politicians. Well,
I mean, we have to take back the Justice Department. We just not to go off on a tangent, but we just the good guys just ran the Justice Department for the last 4 years and had kind of a mixed bag. They actually did a very good job going after folks who happen to be Democrats, right? Like Bob Menendez and
and Hunter Biden.
And Hunter Biden. Yeah, that was a whole other complicated story, but
they let the big guys
a record. Yeah, absolutely. Well, my number one issue right now is. We're seeing so many people behind so many of our institutions that are watchdogs who seem to be, retreating or giving up right now. I think a good way of looking at it is compare the current moment to the event that really I came of age as somebody who became interested in politics and journalism, which was Watergate, right? Watergate happened because almost every institution that is like a check and balance on power in this country was clicking on all four cylinders, right? Not all the media, but a lot of the media in terms, or enough of the media in terms of the Washington Post and CBS News and Walter Cronkite and other people were doing their jobs and pretty fearlessly. You just had all the news organizations that had defied Nixon the year before in publishing the Pentagon Papers, and that was the mindset in the media. You had a judiciary with people both on the district level like Judge Sirica who wouldn't let the scandal go away, and all the way up to the Supreme Court, which voted 8-0 to make Nixon hand over the tapes, and you had a Congress that had an amazingly bipartisan kind of anger over Watergate to some degree, not totally. There were definitely Republicans in Congress who were, Nixon, zealous defenders, but there were enough Republicans and enough, Democrats who really pushed to investigate Watergate. And, as a result, this kind of assault on the Constitution, a president who set up this illegal bugging operation and the plumbers and all the other illegal activities they were involved in was held in check. And you look at all those same institutions today. The judiciary is just full of judges like Judge Cannon, you know, who are in the tank for Trump, and at least 4 Supreme Court justices who were even willing to, you know, stop this Judge Merchan and you know, this week, you know, Congress, you've got Democrats tripping over themselves to not all Democrats, but enough of them to pass this bill that you know, is going to jumpstart Trump's deportation plans. Just an ill-advised bill. It's unfortunate that the arguments against it don't fit on a bumper sticker, and so they're panicking and just voting for it. And it's not the kind of leadership we need right now. And and you and I have talked many times and are well aware of the media's what's been happening on the media front. The tepid both sides news coverage, and then the Jeff Bezos of the world, and the owner of the LA Times just stepping on editorials and cartoons and everything. So
we may look back and say this tepid both sides stuff was actually better than where we're going.
Absolutely. I mean, I did a column about I guess it was like in August of 2023. It was right around the time that the Republican primaries were starting, and Trump had just been arrested down in Georgia. And, I said back then that the media just didn't seem to understand the moment we were in, and didn't understand the challenges that democracy was facing at that time. And it went viral, and I got a big response to it. I think it was probably read by more people than any other column I've written in the last couple of years. So people saw that, that column resonated with a lot of people. And here we are a year and a half later, and it turned out rock bottom was so much lower than that, to see editorial cartoons and endorsements and editorials being killed by publishers that are afraid of offending Trump. And, it filters to the newsroom, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, the threat of defamation lawsuits is real. I think, you look at, for example, the suit that Trump filed against the Des Moines Register, right, over the Iowa poll. And the thing about that is, it seems crazy, and it probably is, and at some point, maybe I'm being naive, but I think at some point we'll probably get before a judge will throw it out at some point. But that's not what matters. What matters is Trump wants every newsroom in the country to be afraid, because at first it's like, well, he's doing 60 Minutes. So if you work at a paper like the Des Moines Register, or let's say the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Chicago Tribune, right? If you work at a paper like that, you might have been thinking a year ago, it's like, well, Trump has his feuds with the New York Times or whatever, but he's not coming after us. And it's like, no, he's coming after the Des Moines Register. Why wouldn't he come after the Chicago Tribune or the Philadelphia Inquirer or some other paper that takes him on? I mean, he wants...
Correct me about this. Didn't the Register say they were not going to defend the pollster, that she was on her own?
Yeah, basically, as I understand it. I mean, unfortunately, and it's something we see a lot these days, but the Des Moines Register, is a paper with a great history and tradition, and it has, I have no doubt, like if it's like any other, newspaper that I know in the country, it's got some great people working there, but it's also owned by a corporation, Gannett, and the corporation is pretty terrible, I mean, in fact, it's funny because with almost no publicity at all, because everybody was so focused on Jeff Bezos and the Post and also the LA Times to some degree, Gannett also decided not to endorse in the presidential race. And,
No, the Tribune didn't endorse. They took a pass.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but the thing about it is, I mean, we're talking about an election where you've got one candidate who has made it clear that he's going to go after the First Amendment and freedom of the press. I mean, he's explicitly called the enemies of the people. He's made it clear. I mean, they're doing as much as they can with these defamation lawsuits. They would love to change the laws to make it even easier. They would love for the Supreme Court to overturn the 1964 Sullivan decision that sets a high bar for libel. But they would love for all of those things to happen. I mean, you can certainly.
That's just the media. He's going after the media, universities, unions, and any nonprofit he doesn't like. He's going after all the pieces of civil society that are not under his control. And it is totally about having no one and ever who has the power to stand up to them. And that is not American in any way. It's cruel, it's authoritarian, and we have to just fight it of every ounce we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's already a playbook for what they're doing. And you know about this. And
Viktor Orban.
It's Viktor Orban in Hungary, is already, he's like 5 or 6 years ahead of what we're doing. And he's been remarkably successful at shutting it, so they know the strategy. They know what they need to do, and they're doing it. And a lot of these, don't get me started on the universities, but I mean,
well, I can't because you and I run out of time, Will. We've run out of time.
The next time I come back, we'll talk about what's happening on college campuses with free speech.
Yeah, I know it means a lot to you. You read a great book about it. I mean, it means a lot.
And that happened before Trump even got elected, right? So, it's like it's obeying in advance. So, well, the next time I come back on, we'll talk about the second part, which is what we're going to do about all of this, because we can't do nothing. We cannot do nothing. We can't.
Well,
we can't
have
walk
a good
away
break.
And put our headphones on.
And I can't wait to hear about your visit to D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back on and at some point, and we'll talk about that and whatever else happens in the first few weeks of the Trump administration. There's going to be a lot to talk about. So, all right.
Thank you, Will, as always. Really appreciate it.
Care.
Okay, everybody. Yeah, that was the great Will Bunch, Philadelphia Inquirer's national reporter. We're going to take a quick break, and then I have a real treat for you, Professor Nancy McLean. Absolutely fabulous. You're going to love her.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Professor Nancy McLean is an award-winning scholar of the 20th century in the United States. I loved her book, Democracy in Chains, so much that I gave a copy to everyone on the editorial board when I ran the Chicago Sun-Times. She has demonstrated the intellectual and ideological underpinnings of the American right wing and its funders. And, subsequent to that book, others, I'm thinking of now Heather Cox Richardson, have followed in that path by writing about political history of the same movement. It turns out same people, same money. And now Nancy is taking on an additional role as the fellow at the new Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, and we're going to talk about all of that. Welcome. It's so good to talk to you again.
It's been a few years.
There you are. Yes, it has been. Absolutely has been. And you've been busy. I've been busy.
I have. I think we all have. But yes, I have.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you. Jeremy Young from Penn is a frequent guest on this show, and he's long argued that the attack on higher ed, like the attack on unions and nonprofits and on journalism, are all efforts to crush institutions that might stand between the right wing that you know so well and its ultimate control of our society. And now you're helping higher ed fight back.
Yeah, I think that is a very accurate depiction of what is going on. I think we all need to remember those words from Christopher Rufo, who designed the cynical attack on, what he called critical race theory to basically undermine anti-racism around the country and stop, any kind of efforts to create an inclusive society. But he actually said in a speech to Hillsdale College, this right-wing college, we are laying siege to the institutions. We are laying siege to the institutions. And he was advocating for that. And that is what we've seen, over the last decade. I mean, we have seen attacks on election administration. We have seen attacks on public health. We have seen attacks on K through 12 schooling, on higher education, on and on and on. So I think that depiction from your colleague at Penn is spot on. And we need to recognize what's happening. Yeah, I am thrilled to be part of the new Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom. It's housed at the American Association of University Professors, the AUP, which is also a union for faculty in higher education and defends shared governance. And it's a great group. We have about 12 fellows. People are doing all kinds of good work that I can tell you more about, but I feel like I've been talking for a bit here, so I'll pass it back to you.
No. I want to hear about this good work because okay. I worry that higher ed is not able to defend itself. I think the government is going to use very powerful and coercive tools. They can tax endowments. They can limit foreign student enrollment. They can reduce NIH and NSF research spending. They can reduce the amount any grant that goes to overhead. They can, hold congressional show trials like they did a couple of years ago. How do you fight back against all of this?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, and we're going to need many, many more hands on deck for this. Actually, Penn has a group called Champions of Higher Education, which is former college and university presidents. So I am looking forward to connecting with them. But it is a lot. I mean, we've also seen in the almost 30 states that are dominated by the Republican Party, where they control the legislatures, that they have gone after higher education and the honest teaching of history, and any recognition of LGBTQ people, as they did in DeSantis's Florida. So one of the things that we've done in this center is try to document the extent of the attacks and what we're up against with that. So if people go to the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom website, they'll see a very significant report on the manufacturing of the backlash in higher education that reports on all of that legislation. We're also now starting to reach out to and work with professional associations, in different disciplines, so that they can alert their members to the kinds of resources that we can provide. We're presenting at conferences. We're holding our own conferences. In fact, we'll have one in Washington, D.C., January 24th, that will be open to the public and with partners like Penn and others. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but we've got to start somewhere. And as you say, it's too many administrators in higher education, I think, are engaging in what the fascism scholar Timothy Snyder calls anticipatory obedience, where fascist leaders can create such a threatening atmosphere that people begin to self-police, and to back up and to not do the normal things that they would do in fear of, setting off the fascist and authoritarian aggressors. And so, as you said, we saw that happening, a few years back with the congressional hearings. But we're also going to be seeing this now. I think my own institution, Duke University, has $1 billion in federal contracts. As you point out, that is quite the stick for, a tyrannical regime to be able to wield. The right has also organized large donors, particularly boards, people who sit on boards of trustees and conservative alumni, to rally them as a kind of battering ram to get the changes that people like the Koch network and donors on the right seek. We just need so many more eyes on this. We need faculty to respond. We need, alumni who have appreciated their institutions and want to protect them to assemble when they are facing attack or facing these external pressures. We need students to be active in defending what they value in their education. So, lots of work for everyone going into this new turbulent time.
I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm really terrified. At the end of the last Trump administration, they published their version of history, the 1776 Project.
Yes.
And it was,
I'm a historian. That is
You're
my field,
an actual scholar.
And it's appalling. Yes, it's just an exercise in national myth making. Really, I mean, and actually, there's a wonderful someone else you might want to talk to. My friend Jason Stanley, a philosopher at Yale, has a new book out called "Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Shape the Future." So, yes, these efforts like the 1776 commission that Trump convened in his last administration are really about trying to take from us, the citizenry, the capacity, the knowledge about our past that we need to navigate our present and shape a better future. So it is right up there with the efforts of authoritarian regimes around the world right now to rewrite history in a way that suits them and their followers.
I remember, I was 10 years old. I was in fourth grade, and we were like studying ancient Egypt or something. And I learned that, a new pharaoh shows up, and they chisel the old guy off the obelisk. Right?
Oh, wow. I did not know about that history then.
And they put the new guys up. And I thought, my 10-year-old self said, boy, that's not fair. There's something wrong about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think Americans would say, sorry, we actually know that people were enslaved in the United States, and pretending that they liked it just isn't going to pass the smell test.
Well, this is like so much in our country now, though, Edwin. When parents are polled, as after DeSantis was attacking, honest history teaching and all the rest, parents, people do not like book bans. I believe it's 70 to 80% of people, oppose book bans, oppose these attacks on libraries. People want their children to be able to learn honest history because they understand that they need that honest, full history in order to, operate intelligently in the world. But what's happened is that, our politics have been so deformed now by the kinds of developments I wrote about in Democracy in Chains, the deliberate rule rigging, the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the funding of a vast apparatus of disinformation, which is, Fox, the Fox network, and right-wing talk radio that fills the news deserts in rural communities around the country, the deliberate, cynical funding of Christian nationalism, to spark fear and loathing among, conservative Christians. I mean, all of this has been so calculated and so devastating that often, even if people have policy positions, like most do, where they support Social Security and Medicare and they don't want them harmed, yet they will vote for someone like Donald Trump, who's bringing in an army of, billionaires in his cabinet who want nothing more than to smash up the popular achievements of the 20th century, including public education, including Social Security and Medicare, including environmental protection and women's reproductive rights and civil rights of all kinds. So, we are starting off on a stormy period that we are all I think all of your listeners are, and many of our friends and family are deeply alarmed about. I mean, one thing I can say though, as a historian, is that first of all, these bullies and authoritarian figures always overstep, right? They always exaggerate their power, and they do terrible things. I mean, look at our worst authoritarians, the American slaveholders, who, rather than allow any curbing of their property rights to hold other people in slavery, instead engaged in treason and seceded from the United States, right? But, and the Nazis thought that they were going to have a 3,000-year Reich. So, these regimes end up being brittle and flawed, but it takes people actively organizing, and widening the fissures in their coalitions, and defending institutions that we've worked so hard to build up over the years, and changing the narrative. And also, I think it's going to be really, really crucial going into the second Trump administration. Stop focusing on the man, right? This only makes authoritarian figures stronger. Instead, we should have, sort of laser focus on how the agenda that his administration implements is going to be hurting the people he voted for, right? And all those people who thought that they were voting against, because they were angry, understandably, that their real wages, have not kept pace with inflation, and that they've not grown for years. So there was, some legitimate anger out there, but, they're not going to get relief from inflation. Trump already told us that he doesn't think he can do anything about that. But what he will be trying to do is the least popular parts of his agenda, including the mass deportations, the efforts to turn the Justice Department and police forces and even the military against his enemies, his self-described enemies, and all of these other things that most people don't want, didn't vote for, and will be appalled by. So even though it's painful, to watch this, and many of us want to look away and did so for several weeks, perhaps, over the break, is really important to come back now, to stay calm, to look forward, and to focus on that which we can affect, right? Or that which we can use to show people, who this administration is really for and what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, the way I couch it is we have to protect what we can, but I think the costs are going to be high. And I mean, you talked about leading us into a civil war, and you talked about the Third Reich. I mean, they didn't last forever, these bad guys, but the horrific slaughter was awful. I don't think we're going to have that level of bloodshed, but I think there'll be
I don't either.
Terrible costs, and people will be hurt. Yeah. So if we can't, we have to bear witness always, even where we can't help people. I mean, the Justice Department, I think just this week, took the cold case of the Tulsa massacre, in 1921, and they said it was a cold case, so they went back and looked at everything. And I just looked at this. They said, let me just read you this. The trigger for the violence of the Tulsa race massacre was the kind of unfounded condemnation that at the time commonly justified unspeakable treatment of black men. The allegations of a white man led police to arrest 19-year-old Dick Rowland for allegedly assaulting a white woman who operated an elevator he used. A local newspaper then sensationalized the story, and soon a mob of white Tulsans gathered outside the courthouse demanding a lynching, and it went on from there. It just strikes me as so now.
It is so now. I mean, and that's why we had also talked about the fact that my book on the 1920s Ku Klux Klan has just come out in a 30th anniversary edition. And I have to tell you, it was just bone chilling for me to go back to the text of that book and see how it speaks so dramatically to our moment, in the kinds of prejudices that, enable the KKK of the 1920s to become a mass movement, to enroll, over 5 million members, including in cities like Chicago.
Huge.
And Indiana was the heart of the 1920s Ku Klux Klan. But all of the kinds of things that we see coming from this MAGA movement were part of the Klan's, way of seeing the world. This sense that immigration was a terrible peril, that, African Americans and Latinos were not legitimate political actors in American public life. They shouldn't be, have access to or participate in American democracy, that women should be kept from certainly any kind of, rights of their own or, sexual autonomy, that they must be, watched over and commanded by their husbands or fathers. Just all of this stuff is so similar. And as you say, that role of rumor and disinformation in sparking violence and in leading large numbers of people to behave, in insane ways and violent ways because of agitation from the right, which, wanted, engaged in vigilantism in the case of the Klan, and ultimately wanted to create a kind of a race war in America in the case of the Klan. But we know also in the Trump administration that, or with the last Trump administration with this MAGA movement, they have really given such oxygen to the right-wing militia movements, and the white supremacist movement. So I was just reading actually earlier this morning the piece that just came out in ProPublica. It's called The Mole and the Militia, or The Militia and the Mole.
Oh, isn't that a fabulous piece? It's a fabulous piece.
It was really powerful. But, what this individual found in going undercover and infiltrating these groups is that they have grown so significantly, because of all the disinformation and the agitation from Trump himself and from MAGA. And they are really untethered, and that adds to the combustibility of this moment. So, it's
what would you think?
We're all going to have to do a lot of deep breathing,
Well, but take a deep breath because, in just a few weeks, he's going to pardon some of the people who were involved in January 6th. So what does that? What does that do historically? How does that? What does that do to this movement?
Yeah, well, that's a catastrophe, and that will also further embolden these militia groups on the right and anyone who wants to engage in violent domination under the guise of patriotism. But, Edwin, I really trace this back to the Roberts majority on the Supreme Court. We would not be in this position. Donald Trump would not have been a viable candidate, certainly would not have won the election if we had not had a judicial coup, really, by the 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court that was put there by the kind of, right-wing actors, movements, money that I talk about, in Democracy in Chains. Yeah. And they, they prevented him, and also Eileen Cannon, the Florida judge who blocked that case, but they prevented him from even facing a trial, let alone, a jury of ordinary Americans. And we need to remember that every single time Donald Trump came before a jury, whether a grand jury or in the New York case, he lost, right?
He lost.
People saw that he was guilty. And when he's come before judges that weren't his own judges, like the Supreme Court 6 and Eileen Cannon, he's lost consistently. And so by delaying, taking up the case until the very end of their term and then granting him the immunity that even, King George didn't enjoy at the time of the American Revolution, by doing that, the Supreme Court really stacked the deck. That's the right-wing majority. So I think, part of what all Americans have to understand, too, is the range of actors involved in all this. because, yes, there are these kind of unhinged, people in the militias, but there are also, wealthy, Yale and Harvard trained actors like Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and et cetera, Samuel Alito, who are engaging in creating tyranny in America. And I think we really need to start calling them out as well and drawing as much attention to them and to the illegitimacy of that Supreme Court majority as we can.
You're preaching to the choir here. I love it. Before we go, I want to just turn back to your work with the AAUP. And do I have this right? It was partly founded by John Dewey. And he was, I think, a terrible writer, but a wonderful thinker if you take the time with his writing. And he talked about how important education how education and democracy are they go together. They create that if you in what you're doing in protecting free speech and free thought is the sort of the base requirement for us being able to sustain democratic governance or even any kind of self-control.
Well, I think you've said it beautifully there. And Chicago, of course, was home to John Dewey and the work that he did at the University of Chicago. But yes, a great theorist of democracy, a great American pragmatist thinker who really understood. He has a book called Democracy and Education, but understanding that, and also just for the larger question of public education, none of our institutions are perfect or are pure. In a society that's been as class and as racially divided as America has been, that taints everything. And yet our public school system, has been pretty extraordinary over the generations in creating connections and enabling people to see their shared interest in a democracy, which is, in fact, our only alternative to domination by powerful interests like corporations, right? But helping people to grow and develop as individuals, to appreciate what's going on in their society and their natural world. I'm looking out at the beautiful kind of ice that's melting after snow here in North Carolina. I mean, education has had extraordinary power, and our higher education system has been the envy of the developed world, of the rest of the world, not the developed world, the whole world. So, it's ironic that it's coming under attack when it actually has been so successful. Now, it has major flaws, like how expensive it's become, but that was also because of these same kinds of actors, on the right, pushing to cut taxation, and tax support of public higher education to push more of the tuition burden back on students, et cetera. So there are real issues that we have to deal with, but what we need to understand is that to solve those issues, we need more and better democracy, not less. And we have to realize that we all depend on these public goods, whether it's education or clean air and water or public health or, so many of these things that affect the quality of our lives and society. And so I think what's happening now, we can all agree is terrifying and awful in so many ways. But I think a countercurrent to that's really developed over the last decade or so is so many more people getting involved, in trying to make democracy work, in trying to protect these institutions. So, there's groups like the Network for Public Education, started by Diane Ravitch, and others, they're working on schools issues, as you said, Penn, on issues of free speech. The AUP, when I was starting graduate school, to the extent that we heard about it at all, it seemed kind of like a stuffy thing for men with, tweed jackets and patches and maybe even a pipe back then. But it's very different from that now. And the AUP, it's also a union now and has won some amazing contract battles that also defend academic freedom, but it has also really come to the aid of faculty and of all kinds, not just tenure track, but contingent faculty too, who have come under attack from the right, scurrilous attack. And you know how that goes. They put something on Fox News, and the next thing you know, you're getting desperate, and so forth and so on. So, and actually, if you do have any faculty folks listening, they could look up something called Faculty First Responders, which is part of our Center for Defending Academic Freedom. It's related to it, but it's a website that provides resources for anyone who comes under such attack, for that individual, for their administrations, for their communities, et cetera. So, again, lots of resources to be found on that website if people are interested and concerned. And I really appreciate your having me on to air some of these issues.
Professor McClain, anytime you're willing to talk, I would love it. I think your work is brilliant, and it is important, and it is timely, and all three of those together, and it's an amazing thing to have happen. So thank you so much, and I love that you are taking I don't know. I mean, you're such a good scholar and a good teacher, but now you're taking it into the realm of a different kind of fight. I wish you all the strength and the good fortune that we need you to have.
Thank you so much, Edwin, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm so impressed at the list of guests. You've had some of my heroes, including Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's such a hero in the fight against corporate capture of government, and my own Anderson Clayton of the North Carolina Democratic Party, who's reviving the party in the state. She's just incredible, Yeah,
not like your Supreme Court, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Although I do think they're going to lose that one. It's a little bit too outrageous, but we'll see.
Too outrageous. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, take a break from the news, and I have yet another scholar coming who you're going to want to hear from, Dr. Michelle Bratcher-Goodwin, when we come back.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I teased you a little bit about a fabulous guest, but I just learned that she's going to be a little bit delayed. So I wonder, since then I'm going to go a little long with her, if you want to call in at 773-763-9278, I might get a call in now so that I don't leave you hanging at the end of the show. But, oh my gosh, how fabulous was that conversation with Professor McClain? And if you haven't read Democracy in Chains, it's a terrific book. And it just, I haven't read her book on the Klan. I'm now going to do that. But this is she follows the scholarship and the money behind the right wing. And it is chilling and frightening. But I was most taken in the conversation we just had when she talked about the judicial coup. And she said we wouldn't have the executive branch problem, the Donald Trump problem we have, were it not for the Roberts Court. And she didn't go to the Citizens United decision in the conversation that we just had, but I know from her book where that came from, and it is all about taking control. And again, the conversation with Professor McClain, the conversation with Will Bunch, and with Chris Geidner before all lead me to the same place. That's sort of a theme for this talk that we're having today, which is, look, our backs are to the wall, no question. And this crowd that has a lot of seats in our judiciary, that has at the moment control of Congress, and I think they're unified in their thinking, and is now going to march into the executive branch filled with people who were vetted from Project 2025 with 100 executive orders ready to go on day one. And Donald Trump isn't writing those. They come right out of Project 2025, and they're going to go after all of the legitimate sources of power in our country that aren't the president. They're going to try and weaken everything that can stand in his way. It is a playbook of Viktor Orban's. It is the playbook of tyrants throughout history, and we have to be jealous. We have to do everything we can to protect these institutions. And I mean, I'm not just talking about protecting the vote here, which we do pretty well. I know they are attacking it, but this is a game we understand. But you're going after higher ed. We need it. It's an enormous part of our freedom and our prosperity. They're going after public education at the K-12 level. Oh, my God. For two reasons. One is ideological. They don't want what we teach. They want to teach whatever comes from their religious tradition and their political tradition, not something that we all agree on together. They going after unions. We'll see that undermined because a union contract may be the only thing that keeps them from doing Schedule F at the way they want to do it, because a lot of the federal employees are union employees, and that will at least slow down some of the damage they're going to do with Schedule F. So they're going to go after unions, and of course, they want to be able to yank the nonprofit status of all kinds of nonprofits that they don't like. They're going to claim that they're somehow terrorists or partisans, and then they'll put them out of business. This is a frightening time, and we can fight back, but we can't do it, with our head in the sand, and we can't do it if we look where they want us to look. He's not taking on Greenland, for gosh sakes. That's, he's not going to, he's not going to go try and annex Canada. Although I see Ross Douthat in the New York Times today says it's probably a good idea for Canada. Seriously? I mean, I think we're talking crazy here. I wouldn't be surprised if, with all this attack on Keir Starmer that Elon Musk is doing in the UK, they probably want that to be a 52nd state or something as well. The point is that on the foreign policy stuff is that all these billionaires want America's government, to start using its power around the world to stop other governments from regulating American businesses. It's kind of shocking. Brian, what do you think?
Hey, good afternoon. Came to me quick. I wanted to comment on the wildfires in Southern California and how it's really going to shake up our politics. 1 second. Pick off speaker. This fire, in the second largest metropolitan area in the United States, is going to make all of our problems worse, like housing. That whole region already had a bad housing problem, and now it's going to get many times worse because you've had, 10, 15, 20,000 homes burned, and the fires still aren't under control. And then we have Donald Trump, the psychopath, going into the White House. America has gone through a very wealthy, peaceful period of time, and I think we're going to have a very turbulent decade ahead of us. And I wish someone could be a counter voice to Donald and his constant lying, misinformation, trying to inflame people, because that's his whole magic show. Keep people angry, confused, lying, always in a fight, always stirred up, as the Nazis said. You want your public hot and stirred up, and that's what Trump's going to do. And I wish somebody on the progressive side or someone sane, maybe George Clooney or Oprah or somebody, could start coming up and, that would draw a lot of attention of average people and comment on what's really occurring in this country. I mean, we have so many hot topics that are coming to a head. Our social safety net program, Social Security, Medicare, this is coming to a head in the next 10 years, and we're going to be decisive. We have a hot war in Europe that we've spent tens of billions of dollars on, where Putin is killing tens of thousands of people, every couple months. And then we have China,
including his own, lots of his own. Yeah,
right. He's just a renegade criminal. Is all he is.
Well,
and then we have China.
His good friend. Yeah.
China.
But Brian, your point is there's a lot. Your point
Taiwan.
is. Let me interrupt you for a second. Your point is that at home and abroad, from climate change to aggressive actors around the world to domestic economics as it relates to things as as fundamental to our well-being as our housing and health care, this is an enormously challenging time. And in place of astute and thoughtful leadership to help us get through this, you have a chaos agent who just likes to cast blame and make everybody angry. And having said that, your point is we need somebody to stand up to him. And
correct.
I guess my view about that is all of us need to stand up to him, because any one person who does it is going to have a billion right-wing media trolls take him down. It is up to all. You're doing it, I do it, and everybody has to do it. Every one of us has to bear witness and tell the truth.
But it's like our corporate media is terrible, because all Trump has to do is pick some stupid fight. They'll pick some stupid fight. He'll pick a fight with Oprah or something dumb like that, and then our corporate media will talk about that for 3 days.
Totally,
and that's his whole magic. We don't. That's
why it's up to us. We can't count on them, Brian. We can't
grab the spotlight. That's the problem. We need somebody to grab the spotlight and the microphone to counterbalance all of his buffoonery in his, his whole magic show of evil. So this fire is.
We'll see what happens, but
and
it's going to be a tough couple of years for sure.
Interesting decade ahead of us.
Yeah.
All right,
Brian. Well, I really appreciate your joining the conversation, and all the way from Albuquerque. I appreciate it. Earl, you're next.
Hi, thank you for having me, Edwin. I appreciate the last conversation, and much of what I wanted to cover, you covered. I'm going to just emphasize the fact that the corporate media has gone along with, like you just said in the last two sentences, the playbook of whatever the right wing has been portraying, and they covered it as such. They covered Donald Trump as a legitimate candidate, which he wasn't. The corporate media really took a fight with CNN. I really am disappointed with how they treated Donald Trump and his legitimacy, as if he wasn't a convicted felon. I think that somehow or another, we really need to get our own infrastructure, just like the right wing has. We need a megaphone, a large megaphone where billionaires are willing to put money behind the idea of democracy and the idealism of what democracy stands for, and that how much money they can make. Look at how easily Amazon caved, Mark Zuckerberg caved after they found out that Trump had won the election. And I understand what they're doing. They're trying to keep as much money and power going in their direction because they don't want the little man to go after them and punish them for not towing the line. I understand the business aspect of it, but it really cripples America. And I wish
thank you for calling in with that. I agree with you, and I really appreciate your making that point. Thank you, Earl. Rick,
Hi.
Where are you calling from?
I call myself Florida Man Rick, but I'm new to the show, so I'll let you know I am a Chicagoan from the Pilsen neighborhood. I'm out here defrosting in Clearwater, Florida, and my comment is this. I think everybody's right spot on. It's these corporations that are behind the scenes. Donald Trump and the Republican Party is nothing without corporate money. And one of the things that I think that we need to do, well, two. First off is we need to concentrate on seeing and focusing the spotlight on what Donald Trump and the Republican Party are going to start deregulating next. That is the linchpin that protects the American society from pollution. It protects us and keeps us healthy, on and on and on. Our civil rights, everything. The other thing we need to do is we need to, I don't know how we would do this, but we need to boycott. We need to take one day, let's start there, one day, maybe a Sunday, where we spend zero money on goods and services. We don't buy gas. We don't buy food. We plan ahead. and show these corporations, shake them up, and let them know that we are here and we are paying attention.
You know, Rick, hang on one second. Let me ask you about that, because people have talked about a general strike. The way the modern economy works, your pocket is being picked whether you spend or not. You have so many subscriptions you don't even know about. Your phone, your internet, the way you get your music, whatever you're watching on cable. You pay for that every month, and it isn't even like going to a store. You go to a store, you might actually hurt a local small business that you care about. These big businesses have figured out how to have their hand in your pocket 365 days a year.
I disagree. I disagree. I think we need to start somewhere. I think even if it's a small chip, it's something that gets their attention.
Okay.
The small businesses need to plan ahead, and we do need to start somewhere. Now, as far as subscriptions go, yes, there are some things that are on a, what is that called? Not a prepay, but it's just automatically taken out. Will we turn that off? You know, a lot of those are controlled. You can control a lot of that. You know, like my cell phone bill, it's on that auto pay. That's what it's called. Mm-hmm. I can turn that off. We can all turn those things off. And somehow, some way, we need to start becoming more vocal, because the Democratic Party, I'm sorry to say it, and I think this is why Kamala Harris didn't do well. I mean, there are a lot of other things, but and we're just not trying hard enough. We lay down. Trump's going to come in, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer go in there. Oh, we need to work with them. No, there's the little bit we give them, and they want more and more and more and more. Now they're trying to turn the narrative into, oh, well, you're too far left. You need to move more farther to the right and join us. No. That's coming from pundits and in the corporate media. That's not coming from most Democrats. But you're right to point out there are people saying it. Yep. And you know what? Here's another thing, and I hear this on WCPT with one of your compatriots there, which I find very disturbing. Why are we not holding the Electoral College accountable? You know, Hillary Clinton won the vote, and they snatched it away from her, the popular vote, and they installed Trump. And after everything he did, the felonies, the rapes, everything that's happened, and they put him back in power again. And you know what? And I request this of you, because I've said this to other people, and nobody is doing it at WCPT. They're not even thinking about it. I'd like you to get just one of those members of the Electoral College on the radio and ask them at least this one question. What the hell are you thinking about? After everything he's done, and you put him back in power? What the hell were you? I'll talk about the Electoral College. I promise. In fact, I'll talk about, when we're done, I'll talk a little bit about the Electoral College, because it doesn't work quite the way you're describing. But thank you for your call, and stay warm there in Florida. And while you're there, you got plenty to protest in Florida. Give them some Chicago help. Thank you, Rick. Until I die. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Rick was talking about the Electoral College. I need you to understand it's not actually a thing. I mean, it's a thing in law, and it's really important, but it isn't like like the College of Cardinals. There aren't people who sit in it year round. And when we elect a president now, we actually elect electors for the president. So it's tied to the popular vote, and while they theoretically might have some choices, they really don't. They're mostly bound to cast anyway. They're chosen by the candidates in that election. So the ones who voted for Trump from all the states that did, they got there because they were assigned to be in the Electoral College for that cycle by the votes that we cast. So if we want the Electoral College to do something different, I want it to go away. But even if it went away, Donald Trump would still have won this time. But
I want it to go away because I think it's appallingly unfair if you live in a big state right now. But I don't think it's the fault of the individual electors. It's the fault of the structure of our system and, of course, voters who cast a hard to understand vote. I'm at 773-763-9278, and I'm also having a little voice issue, so I'm going to take a quick break and pour myself some hot tea, but, short break.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I get, and Fred, you're going to be next. Before I get to you, I just want to say, look, my brother lives in Los Angeles. And thank God, he is not right near one of the fires. Nobody's very far away, even though it's so spread out, Los Angeles. But everyone in that city has houses covered with ash, and the air is hard to breathe. So I don't know, people making light about a few neighborhoods going and not understanding what an enormous disaster this is for the second biggest city in our country. Seriously? And anybody who is doing anything other than how can we help is doing the whole country an enormous disservice. And unfortunately, some of those people are emboldened and empowered, and they're confused because they think power is right. And you know what? It's not. How you use it determines whether you're going to heaven or not. And we cannot let these people do anything other than help the people in Los Angeles. Okay. So sorry for that detour. Fred, what's up? Oh,
hi.
shoot.
Yeah. Oh.
No, I'm terribly sorry to do this with you, Fred. I really am. The guest I was waiting for is now here. We're going to talk for a little bit, and I promise I'll come back to you. But you might hang on or call back. So, all right, everybody. We're going to do a quick change of plans, and I know that wasn't fair to Fred, but we'll get to him later. Dr. Michelle Bratcher-Goodwin is now joining us. She is a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at the Georgetown School of Law, where she also directs the Institute for National and Global Health Law. She is, like so many in higher ed who've gotten a bad name, a stunningly productive scholar who, I don't know how she gets done what she gets done, publishes both scholarly articles in peer-reviewed journals, but also books for a more general audience and opinion pieces that both educate us and offer, going forward ideas on some of the most difficult societal issues, from abortion to racism to voting rights. And I'm proud that she's joining us now. Dr. Goodwin, thank you.
Thank you so very much for inviting me on your show. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you.
So I was reading this week a terrific and terrifying piece by Susan Rinkunas in the New Republic on how the GOP is rewriting what it means to be a person. And then I saw that a lot of that article is based on an interview with you, and I wanted to reach out. It was really, about what does it mean to be a human being in the United States and the Republican effort to change that. Would you shed some light on that for us?
I will. Thank you so much. We take for granted what citizenship means. We think it means the same for everyone who is born in the United States, and we don't understand what the historical challenges were to citizenship. For example, many people might think that the first suffrage movement in the United States was amongst women who wanted to vote. But it's an interesting entry point for us because it wasn't women. It was poor white men or working-class white men who were not allowed to vote. They were not seen as full citizens, even though they were white and they were male, because we had a system of government and laws that recognized full citizenship only amongst those white males who were wealthy and who owned property. And the first line of resistance and those who felt disempowered by that were other white men who were shuttered out. And the same has been true over time. for women, all women, and quite explicitly for people of color and Black people who were enslaved and brought to the United States and then born in the United States. And then over a series of time and through constitutional amendments, we have seen the citizenship on paper unfolds for women and unfolds for Black people and others who are born in the United States. But that doesn't mean that the citizenship has always been real. And in these particular times, the GOP is seeking to rewrite citizenship and who a person is in many different ways. So on one hand, you have the Supreme Court of Alabama, a conservative Supreme Court, rewriting citizenship to say that embryos are citizens. You have, on the other hand, efforts to truly deny the full citizenship capacity of individuals when their voting rights happen to be suppressed. If we focus just in the reproductive space, we see any myriad of things that are just absolutely confusing, inconsistent, and new, and targeted primarily only against women. So, for example, when you have the GOP saying that, well, embryos are now citizens and children, fetuses are now citizens and children, it's only vis-a-vis criminalizing women who don't behave as the GOP wants them to behave when they're pregnant. But it's not instantiating embryos with citizen rights to sue companies that pollute the air that they're gestating, that the pregnant people are breathing in.
Yep.
Fetuses don't get to sue when there's been a car accident and the fetus may be injured, and so on from there.
And they won't go to the census, won't change representation by counting fetuses. You use the phrase that, sometimes if you just say it right, the light bulb goes on for everybody. And I think you're the one who said citizenship gerrymandering. And I loved it. It made it so clear what's going on. But it also made it clear to me that, look, Republicans in the new Congress, they've already gone to work, and they've endorsed bills to get rid of the 1993 National Voter Registration Act. There's a national abortion ban there. There's all kinds of stuff there. Even leaving the World Health Organization. I don't think any of this stuff, any of the abortion stuff, and any of the, we're going to leave the WHO, is actually about public health. There's no way to look at what they do, and particularly after hearing you use that word gerrymandering, and not think this is all about social control.
That's absolutely right. This is all about social control, and it has been. There hasn't been a significant and sincere concern about the health of girls and women. That was the argument that was being used before the Dobbs decision. That's the Supreme Court decision that struck down Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Before that time, when there were conservative state lawmakers passing laws that would undermine abortion rights, they would say, well, we're doing this to protect the health and safety of pregnant women and girls. But the U.S. has the highest rate of maternal mortality in all of the developed world. It ranks 55th in the world. A woman is 14 times more likely to die carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion in the United States. And so that, too, that's information gerrymandering, because it's wrong. It's just blatantly wrong. So wrong that even the Supreme Court has had to acknowledge in 2016, in a case before the Supreme Court, it acknowledged that a woman is 14 times more likely to die in the United States carrying a pregnancy and delivery to term than by having an abortion. And yet the Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade with this kind of information gerrymandering that would suggest otherwise.
Well, our society is confronting a real crisis when it comes to women. And this is not a crisis. I'm not even talking about women's health. I'm talking about women as citizens. In the last few years, women have done remarkably well. enormously improved sort of attendance in colleges, graduation from college, beginning to have enormous roles in corporations around America. Wealth, the women are beginning to have wealth. It's, beginning to change. But they still get paid less for the same job. I mean, there's still that same fight, but yet the trajectory was a good one until recently. And now there's this. I mean, I'm still haunted and disgusted by a man from Illinois who wrote, Your Body, My Choice. And I hear, young men saying, oh, if your wife doesn't take your last name, then you're just a beta somehow. I mean, I'm very happy that my wife doesn't have my last name. She's got a great life and a great career of her own and a lot of talent. It wouldn't make any sense to ever call it something else. I worry about this, and I don't think it's the first time we've encountered this. Wait a minute, we need to be put in their place. What are we supposed to do?
Oh, I really appreciate the conversation that you're opening for this, because a few things come to mind, which is that it's true that we see this trajectory of more women in law schools, more women in medical schools, more women throughout education. And yet we see glass ceilings. Only 17% of partners in law firms happen to be women. Mm-hmm. In our Congress, we don't have a parity of representation, only about 30% women represented. We have state legislatures in this country. In fact, the Dobbs decision came about through the Mississippi legislature petitioning the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's a legislature at that time that was about 86% male, overwhelmingly white male. That does not look like representation in a state where over 50% of the population happens to be women, about 51, 52%. And so that's where we were even before. We had the hope and aspiration that we were chipping away at what had been centuries of discrimination. And this is one of the challenges. It's the same challenge or similar to what we see with vaccines, right? So there are people that say, well, we don't need vaccines any longer because, look, people are doing fine. They don't have polio. Well, they don't have polio because there's polio vaccine. So we've been doing a better job over time, but it's still been with effort. There is a time very recently, not centuries ago, but just decades ago, where women couldn't open up bank accounts in their own name, credit cards in their own name, where marital rape was still legal and permissible in states where women could not serve on juries. And that's really hard to believe at a time in which, for me, half of the students in my, in law school happen to be women. And to your point, we've now hit a time in which there are those who explicitly want to go back and say that women have come too far. And that really happens to be what's so discouraging, I think, for so many in this time. I mean, there are little girls now going into elementary school and middle school as mothers in this post-Dobbs world. How can that mean an equal opportunity for them in their future?
And the reason I asked the way I did, I'm going to stick with this just one more question, because before the election, I think I heard you say, states forcing women to carry a pregnancy to term that maybe they got from a rapist and then to deliver that kid is like a really ugly other chapter in our country because their body autonomy is taken from them. And you call it Jane Crow. And I go back and I go, okay, well, we had a huge civil war to end what we thought was what was then America's so-called race problem. We ended slavery and we had Reconstruction, and gosh knows, as soon as people could vote, we had a lot of black representatives coming from the South, and a lot of things were going in the right direction, as they have with women in the last few years. And then we had Jim Crow, and it got erased. And I am terrified that the Jane Crow you're talking about is aiming to erase the progress that's been made. And now that this election is over and lost, how do we stop America from turning our attention away to look at something else shiny and have to wait another 100 years, as we did with Jim Crow, for our real values to prevail?
Well, I see that in two parts, is that we may be in for a long arc here. The first Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment started in 1865. It was literally a century later, in 1964, 1965, that we get the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Will it take us until 2064 or 2065? I hope not. I very much hope not. Is it possible? Sure it is. But what must we do in the meantime? Well, it's really important that we stay informed. It's not a surprise that as part of the contemporary effort is to do away with books. Ban books, burn books, keep people away from learning about these important markers of our history. And so the first is doing exactly what you're doing, which is to keep people informed, because otherwise misinformation can be a very powerful tool in undermining civil liberties, civil rights, and protections. Information is absolutely key. And then with that, it's important that people do exercise their civil liberties. Voting still is important, and working around voter suppression is going to be critical. We see this with this past election. Elections do matter. Elections count. And I think one aspect of this election happens to be people also being deeply misinformed. We saw how much misinformation there was. So people must vote, they must communicate, they must learn, they must work together and collaborate and cooperate, and they must use their resources, not just financial resources, but other resources as well, and coming together with people and helping to lift up the people who happen to be most vulnerable. I think that one of the more dangerous aspects of a society that is headed where we're heading is ignoring the most vulnerable people amongst us. And that is a real tragedy. You see the anti-immigration, you see the threats to deport people, all those various things where, in fact, this is a nation beyond indigenous people being colonized and enslaved people being brought here. It is a nation then that was built, you know, with the foundations being further secured by people who were immigrants. And I think that there's a lot to be said in embracing those who happen to have the least in our society, which really helps to lift all of us up.
I think so, too. And I wish this administration would just ignore the least powerful, but I think instead they're going to demonize the least powerful, and they're going to use them. They're going to cause them enormous pain. I worry about that.
That's right.
Our history has it in it. I don't know why we think we're immune. We're somehow different than people were in the past. Yeah.
We're not immune to it. And I would add to that, you know, when people think about a horror of the last century, they turn their attention to the Holocaust, and there's a lot of reason for that. But here's some things to think about in terms of the U.S. engagement in that regard. The Germans didn't think of eugenics on their own. Actually, the Germans adopted a model eugenics law that had actually been placed into law in Virginia, and then went before the United States Supreme Court in a case called Buck v. Bell in 1927. And it was at that time, in the 1920s, that the Germans, the Third Reich, saw what it was that our Supreme Court had upheld. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a law that provided for the compulsory sterilization of poor white people that states thought were unfit, that states thought that sapped too much welfare from them. And to think that there were lawmakers and members of courts that thought, okay, we can just eradicate a whole community of people who just happen to be poor and white, and that this is okay. And the Germans picked that up. And verbatim, the Nazi German law on eugenics was that law from the United States. But even more, there were U.S. lawmakers that once the Germans really got going, there were U.S. lawmakers that said the Germans are beating us at our own game. But that wasn't because there weren't efforts in the United States. Over 30 states passed eugenics laws. There were states that set up at states what were called bitter family contests, where in the U.S. there were people being judged by how blonde their hair was, how blue their eye was, and that was before the Third Reich was doing that in Nazi Germany.
Well, I would say, our country has had, I think many other countries are like a race lands in a place, shares a language, and then the idea of a nation comes around them. That's never been us. We have had different races, and so race and wealth have been sort of the dominant ideas that we have gotten wrong for a long time. Sometimes right, sometimes more right than other times. I don't want to be all negative. In fact, more right than most places in the world, but never easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. But there's so much that information matters and narrative matters. And one challenge that we've had has been an honest narration of our past and the maturity to be able to look at that and grow from it. And I will say that the post-Holocaust story of Germany was reflecting on that, was thinking about it, was legislating in response to it. In the U.S., our post-colonization, post-slavery story was the erection of monuments to Confederate leaders in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. It was in the glorification. Yep. That's right. It was in the glorification of birth of a nation. It was in sharing a propaganda that intellectually we know was not true, but became a powerful narrative in our country that black women are just lazy and black men are sexually predacious. Themes that could not have sustained during the 400 years of slavery, but became very powerful tools during Jim Crow in order to paper over the horrors of American slavery. And so what we do a very poor job of is honestly narrating our past, not in a way of beating up the United States, but just honestly reflecting on who we've been so that we can mark better destinies for the future. We don't do that work. We haven't done that mature work, let's say, that South Africa attempted to do with its truth and reconciliation efforts and commissions. In Australia, New Zealand, where they've attempted that same kind of work. Instead, what we've done is significant investments in think tanks that come up with strategies like Project 2025 and other ways to burn books, change history,
or Project 1776. They'll just lie about history. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it does a disservice. You think about it this way. There's such a tremendous disservice that's done to American children who learn less about American history than their other children in Spain, in Germany, in France. They know far more about U.S. history than our own children do because we're too afraid to look in the rearview mirror and assess and deal with our past.
You and I've run out of time. I'm grateful to you for your work and for your spending part of your Saturday here with us. Dr. Goodwin, I will keep an eye out for the things that you publish. And boy, are you going to be busy. Your field is right at the core of this battle we're in.
Thank you so much for setting the opportunity for me and others to be in discussion with you. Thank you so much.
You bet. Take care.
You too.
All right, everybody. Let's continue that conversation. Jim, what do you think?
Hi, Edwin. The direct question has become passé in this Tower of Babel that we're living in. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. When a judicial nominee is up for the Supreme Court, I would relish the idea to ask him, who is Leonard Leo? Who is the Federalist Society? What does the Heritage Foundation have to do with you? How would you rule? Do you rule as a partisan? You can continue to rule ad infinitum, and you'll take any case the Republicans bring to the court. I mean, these are questions that have to be asked, but they're not asked. And we know that the president-elect will not take a direct question. He's never taken a direct question. And if it is a direct question that might be germane to some subject, that's fake news. Get rid of that guy. That's fake news. I mean,
I think sometimes the questions are asked, but they lie. I mean, Kavanaugh was asked about Roe v. Wade. He said, that's settled law. That's not for us. That's settled law. So he answered. He just lied.
Yeah, but I would be interested in what is this federal? They have inexhaustible funds, Edwin. They could put up these candidates for the until the Earth finally explodes.
Yeah,
I mean, it's ridiculous.
And they're helping the Earth explode.
Well, no, yeah, well, as long as they're hidden somewhere, but it ain't going to do them any good anyway. But we're living in this bizarre. What happened to the 12 or 13 million Democrats who were registered to vote that didn't vote? What do you think happened with those people?
I don't know. And
I mean, that's the mystery of the ages. Who would register for a presidential election because of every 4 years and say, "Oh, I'll discard that ballot. I'll vote 4 years from now if I'm still alive." Like, you've got to guarantee you're going to still be alive 4 years from now.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the most absurd thing I've ever seen. Anyway, Edwin, thanks for taking my call. You have a great week, Edwin. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see. Eduardo. Wow, I'm getting a bunch from Florida today.
Yeah, I want to get away from the cold. Edwin, real quickly, in the short time, what do you think Mr. Maduro's fate is this year? They ended up $25 million for his arrest. Do you see any kind of power change here? I know they briefly arrested Mr. Machado here, but he's free for now.
Yep. Okay, just so those of you who are listening know, this is a question about Venezuela. Maduro lost a presidential election and then said, "Oh no, I won." The person he ran against has had to flee the country. He has some opposition in the country, a woman who continues to get arrested and then freed and arrested and freed. But he is, I think, today, right, being sworn in. It's either today or right around now. He's being sworn in for another term.
He's been sworn in, right.
And the Biden administration, others did not recognize him. I expect Trump to recognize him, say, he's the president, there's no problem down there, everybody's safe, and therefore the Venezuelans who came to the United States to flee his tyranny and the collapse will be all sent back. And I don't think 1 second the United States will stand on the side of people who want a democratic and free Venezuela that isn't corrupt and isn't dangerous. I think they will say it's fine and we're sending everybody home. That's what I think.
Thank you, Edward.
Yeah. Did you think differently? No. All right. Well, Venezuela is a really interesting case. And, I teach this course at DePaul, and I'm trying to figure out which countries around the world I want to talk about where democracies have been in jeopardy. Hungary and Venezuela are sure top of the list. I'm really quite worried about how our incoming administration will deal with these tyrants around the world. I would like to say that they would stand up for democracy, as America always has, even as flawed as we've been. We have always stood up for it. We've always believed in it. Now I expect we stand up for the tyrants. I worry that we are on the wrong, we've switched sides in the world. I mean, England, poor little England, right? They did Brexit. It was a mistake. They left the EU, but now they're helpless. And Elon Musk is going after them. And I expect, Donald Trump will follow them. They better hurry back and join Europe again, because they can't face the world alone. People need allies. And they counted on the United States, And I don't know who can count on us. I guess Putin. I mean, remember, Trump is, while he's threatening our allies and our friends and our closest neighbors, Mexico, Canada, threatening them, talking about taking Greenland from Denmark, just taking over like Putin did to Ukraine. And instead of addressing, our friends and allies, he's just desperate to get a meeting with Putin, who said, oh, you know what? No, it's not on my books. Even Putin is like playing with him now. This is a terrible place to be. And again, I'm an optimist. You know that. And I am in awe of elections. The fact that we elected Mr. Trump should tell us things that we listen to. And one of the things they're telling us is that Americans aren't satisfied. They're not satisfied with the direction of the country. They weren't. So they lashed out. But it was really dangerous lashing out. And you know why they're not satisfied? This gap between the very, very, these billionaires and the rest of us. We don't want to live in an oligarchy where people tell us what to do. And I know the pace of social change makes people nervous, and we have to be more honest about that and more thoughtful about how we talk about it. There are people who are scared by all the issues around gender, terrified. We have to be careful about how we talk about it. And I don't mean we should shy away from it. And I don't mean we should not protect anyone. We should protect everyone. But we have to help America move forward. And oh my gosh, we are now in a dark time. And, what are we, 10 days away from Donald Trump taking power and issuing a pile of executive orders, all of the Project 2025 stuff happening, all of those people that have been vetted by Project 2025, trained in Project 2025, hired into the government. Resistance is going to be very important, very smart resistance. So do not let your members of Congress cave, but also don't let your local governments cave. Build civil society, strengthen unions, strengthen education, public education, university education, work with nonprofits, build stronger communities, and do not be distracted. And certainly do not get into this blame game of some kind of person is causing this terrible problem in our country. It's not happening. It's not about a kind of person. There are a handful of individuals. One of them is named Trump. One of them is named Musk. It appears that one of them is named Bezos. It appears that another one is named Zuckerberg. And you know what? They're asking our government to go to work for them, pressuring our allies to change their laws so that they can not be regulated in other countries. Shame on them. And we need to stand up. And I'm doing it, and I'm an old man, and I'm still standing up and still fighting this fight, so I know you can too, and I know you will. Anyway, another week has gone by, another week where I think I had some pretty great guests, even if the schedule was a little jumbled. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I really appreciate your calls and the passion that you show for our country and for, the best, our better angels. I will talk to you next week. Take care.